Okay, I'm going to answer this next question briefly, I promise. Is behavior in the classroom an appropriate measure of musical progress? No. I mean, to a certain extent, you can take things like attendance, and that can be part of the grading system. But I think the actual progress of students needs to be measured as well. Yeah, you can't grade on personal factors. As a you can't. I mean, I don't like to say it like this, but when you're assessing, you can't let your personal feelings for a student get in the way of what they've actually achieved. Do your personal beliefs about assessment coincide with your assessment practices? Well, one would hope. But as Brophy says, there are a lot of things that work to prevent, um, the two things from working with each other. But I don't necessarily think that an organized and systematic approach is the answer to this question. Because, I mean, if time is at such a premium, when do you have time to organize this systematic approach unless you do it before your job starts or in the summer? I think the organized and systematic approach has there's a danger there, with because you always have to take into account individual classes which change every year. So that means your organized and systematic approach is going to have to change every year. So, I mean, I'm not sure if that's the answer to this question. And again, like going back to what I was saying earlier with the influence of curriculum on a teacher's assessment procedures, sometimes you won't be able, like, no matter how hard you try, to get your assessment beliefs to coincide with your assessment practices. I mean, you can try, and that's always a good thing, but you have to be realistic about the limitations. You can't just say I'm going to disregard all the restrictions I have on me and do it my own way. You have to remember that you are being hired. Teaching is a job. You have, to some extent, you have to follow the rules. And so, is a personal philosophy of assessment even necessary? Brophy says it is, and my answer is kind of. I think assessment is a combination of two things. I think the purpose of assessment is to try and see if what you've been doing in the classroom is working for your students. And I think that's a combination of the curriculum themes or objectives or whatever you want to call them. It's a combination of that and how the teacher is implementing those things. I think assessment is kind of the outcome of that. And I think teachers should have some influence on assessment. And in order to give educated input, they need to have some thoughts about what assessment should be and what it should do. But again, there may be restrictions on it. So I think having a philosophy of assessment is good, but I think we need to stay practical about it. Like I said in the last clip, I think we need to remember that teaching, it is a job. It is an art too. And I'm not saying that someone needs to disregard their passion for teaching, in order to fit the system and keep a job. But by the same token, you can't philosophize, to the point where it's not practical anymore. In the Ken Robinson video that was part of one of the assignments for this class, he says that one of the major problems with university professors, and this is no criticism of any university professors who may happen to be watching this video, that university professors view their bodies as a transportation vessel for their heads, and they're always caught up in their head. And I think with teaching, and teaching music, teaching anything, we need to be careful not to get stuck in our heads, and not to get too hyped up on our own philosophies, and to be practical about it, and not to get so absorbed in our own personal opinions about things that we lose. First of all, if there are already assessment procedures or curriculum in place, they were put there for some reason, and to just flat out deny, them on the basis of your own personal assessment, to me is foolish. There's obviously some reason they were put there, so find out why they were put there, and try and work with people, I think that what Brophy says here about implementing your own personal assessment program during your first year of teaching is definitely impractical to me. It doesn't seem right. In the case study book, there's one called "Marching to a Different Drummer" or something like that, where the teacher, the fictitious main character, has to go back and teach at his old high school. He's an alumnus of the school, and he goes back to teach there. And the conundrum in the case study is whether or not he should try to force his own, philosophy and methods into the classroom in the first year, or wait and see what was already in place and see why it's already in place and how it works, and get to know the teachers, gain the trust of the other faculty and the administration before he jumps headlong into something. And I think that's a really good point, and that case study stuck with me in particular because I think that's a real practical side of teaching, and that's part of the political side of teaching. And we have to be careful not to let the importance of philosophy, and I do say philosophy is very important to teaching. If teachers don't know why they're doing something, there's no passion behind it, and the kids won't learn anything. But by the same token, you can't let philosophy drive everything you do. Education is political. It's one of the 5 tenets of critical pedagogy. So you have to take into account, the political factors as well. And I think that's really important, in regard to education, in regard to curriculum, in regard to assessment. So I think a personal philosophy of assessment, or a personal philosophy of anything, is important. But I think it also needs to be taken in context, and that does not overwhelm the rest of what it means to be a teacher, and an assessment is one of the more set things, I think, within music education. I think one of the benefits of music teaching is that there's a relative amount of freedom in how you teach, and in a lot of curriculums what is taught. I think music teachers, because of the abstract nature of music, often have a lot of control over over what is taught. Although, as I said earlier, that may or may not be the case. So, I think with assessment philosophy, it's important to know about philosophy. It's important to know about the different kinds of assessment, and to be able to give educated input about what assessment procedures will best fit the students you're teaching. But again, I think it needs to be taken in context. I think that's one of the more important things with assessment philosophy and music education philosophy in general.